Cinderella met a lovely fellow, Prince Charming, at the ball. The ugly sisters with their warts and blisters used to make her scrub and crawl. I'll tell her tale for one and all. Cinderella. This is the story of Cinderella. Once upon a time, many moons ago, there was a gentleman called Baron Hardup, who had a very charming lady for his wife. They had a daughter whose name was Ella. She was a very good girl and always dutiful towards her doting parents. But sadly, Ella's mother died, causing much grief to her and her dear father. However, after 2 years had passed, Baron Hardup married another woman. The main reason the new wife was attracted to him was because he bore the title Baron.
Oh, I'm married to a baron.
His new wife's name was Hyacinth, and she was so full of airs and graces that she looked down on anyone she deemed working class.
Oh, look at her.
She had 2 unattractive grown-up daughters called Griselda and Imelda.
Oh, I'm wonderful. Not as wonderful as I.
Like their mother, they were social climbers of the highest order. They would do anything in their power to climb to the top of the social ladder. In fact, their ambition was to marry into royalty. The Baron's beautiful daughter Ella suffered greatly at the hands of these 3 harridans. They were jealous of her good looks, her charming nature, and her ability to get on with everyone around her. Griselda and Imelda particularly hated her. They pushed her around and made her do all the chores around Hardup Hall, where they all lived in relative poverty, due to the spendthrift ways of the Baron's insatiably greedy new wife.
Do you like my new hat?
The Baron's manservant, Buttons, was the only one to recognize poor Ella's plight. Griselda and Imelda, whom Buttons called the ugly sisters, forced their poor stepsister to clean the chimneys every day,
Up the chimney now.
causing her clothes to be covered in cinders. "Oh, look, Ella's covered in cinders," remarked Griselda. "That's what we'll call her, Cinderella." "Aha, Cinderella! I think that name has a ring to it," Imelda noted, laughing at the newly renamed Cinderella's expense. The 2 ugly sisters and their insidious mother, Hyacinth, continued to laugh with all their might. When they left the room, Buttons consoled poor Cinderella. "Don't worry, they'll get their comeuppance. What goes around comes around," he added, as Cinderella sobbed into her handkerchief. "Why, thank you, Buttons, you're so kind," said Cinderella, "but I'll believe it when I see it." The next morning there was a knock on the door of Hardup Hall. Hyacinth answered, to be greeted by a messenger from the king's palace. "I bring you invitations to a grand ball," said the messenger. "King Charles is throwing the ball in aid of his son, Prince Charming, for he wants him to find a suitable wife who will look after the heir to the throne." "Ooh, heir to the throne," said Hyacinth. "Who are the invitations for?" she asked, whilst visualizing one of her daughters on the throne next to the handsome Prince Charming. The messenger replied, "I have 3 invitations, one for Griselda, one for Imelda, and one for a young lady known as Ella." "Oh, Ella left many moons ago, without so much as a by your leave," said Hyacinth. "But I'll take the 3 invitations just the same. If Ella does return, she will get her invitation." But in the meantime, I'll give the other two to the beautiful Griselda and Imelda." The messenger, satisfied that his job had been done, set off on his horse to deliver the rest of the invitations to the other young ladies of the kingdom. At last the big day arrived. The ugly sisters, Griselda and Imelda, set off to the ball in high spirits, but looking like mutton dressed as lamb. Griselda wore a bright, sickly green frock, so ill-fitting that her flabby stomach caused the garment to burst at the seams. Her bright blue smudged lipstick seemed to highlight her blackened teeth and her unkempt prickly moustache. Imelda wore a garish pink satin ball gown that was also too tight for her portly frame. As they left in Baron Hardup's horse-drawn carriage, Cinderella broke down and began to cry. "Don't worry," said Buttons to Cinderella. "We can have a ball of our own. Look, I have prepared some ginger beer and cucumber sandwiches."
Oh, Buttons.
"I really appreciate your trying to cheer me up," said Cinderella, as she politely sipped at the ginger beer and nibbled the slightly stale cucumber sandwiches. "I brought my flute. I can play you a tune, so we can dance and sing along and pretend we're at the royal ball," said Buttons. And as the two of them danced for an hour or more, Cinderella began to accept that she was never destined to go to the ball. She also came to appreciate that the finer things in life did not come from being rich, but from the heart as someone as humble as the kindly Buttons. Suddenly, there was a loud knocking at the door of Hardup Hall. Baron Hardup burst into the room and ordered Buttons to answer the door.
"Whoever it is, send them away. I am busy reading my papers, and I do not wish to be interrupted. Also, I would appreciate it if you would stop dancing around and playing music. I need peace to concentrate on all things important to me."
"No problem," said Buttons as he left to answer the door. Cinderella and her father, Baron Hardup, had a brief but reflective moment.
"I am sorry you were not able to attend the royal ball," said Baron Hardup, "but you must accept your fate, as I must accept mine. We are both lumbered with Hyacinth, Griselda, and Imelda, and unless our fortunes change dramatically, we will have to endure them for the rest of our lives."
On that note, Baron Hardup briefly hugged his confused daughter before returning to read his papers.
"Thank you, Daddy."
Shortly afterwards, Buttons returned with an old woman at his side. "Who are you?" inquired Cinderella.
"I am your fairy godmother,"
said the old woman, who twirled 3 times, thus transforming herself into a beautiful fairy with huge white wings, a long sparkling magic wand, and a little halo that hovered just above her beehive of blonde hair. "My fairy godmother? This is extraordinary. What brings you here?" asked a bedazzled Cinderella. "What is the thing you most wish for on this night of all nights?" asked the fairy godmother. "If the truth were known," whispered Cinderella, "I wish I could go to the ball." "I was summoned here by the force of magic," said the fairy godmother, "and believe me, Cinderella, you shall go to the ball." Without hesitation, with her magic wand, she conjured up an invitation to the ball. Cinderella's name was written across it in gold and endorsed by the king's signature. "Oh, this is wonderful," said Cinderella. "But alas, I don't have any clothes to wear to the ball." The fairy godmother again waved her magic wand, causing Cinderella's old rags to be transformed into the most beautiful ball gown ever seen. What's more, her scruffy, soot-ridden shoes were replaced by a pair of gorgeous crystal glass slippers. "Oh, this is marvellous!" exclaimed Cinderella. "I am very grateful, but alas, I still won't be able to go to the ball, for I have no way of getting there." "Fear not," said the fairy godmother. "I have a solution." On saying that, she opened the window and pointed her magic wand at an old hollow pumpkin that had been lying in the courtyard since Halloween. A flash of light suddenly surrounded the pumpkin that mysteriously morphed into the most beautiful and illustrious carriage Cinderella had ever seen. "Wow," said Cinderella. "Oh, this is marvellous. But I still can't go to the ball, as there is no horse to guide the carriage to the palace." "Fear not," said the fairy godmother again. "You should know by now that I have solutions for such matters." She pointed her magic wand towards a rat that happened to be scurrying past the carriage, thus transforming it into a beautiful black stallion fit for a princess. "Why, thank you so much," said Cinderella. "This is like a dream come true. But alas, I still can't go to the ball. I have no one to drive the carriage to the palace." "I'll drive you there," said Buttons, "but Baron Hardup hasn't brought me a suit for years." "You don't need to drop hints," said the fairy godmother, with a knowing smile on her kindly face. In no time at all, she had transformed the scruffy-looking Buttons into the most dandy and handsome horseman Cinderella had ever seen. Cinderella cried out in delight and thanked Buttons and her fairy godmother. "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. My dream has come true." Luckily for Cinderella, Baron Hardup had dozed off in the sitting room and was snoring so loudly that he was not disturbed by Cinderella's excitement.
So happy.
"Hush now, child, you'll wake your father, who is asleep in his chair," said the fairy godmother. Then she waved her wand one more time. Suddenly, Cinderella and Buttons found themselves in the carriage behind the horse, with the fairy godmother standing nearby. "You are now prepared to go to the royal ball in style, my child," said the fairy godmother. "But remember, this is magic, and like all magic spells, they have to wear off at some point. You must remember to leave the palace before the stroke of midnight, for at this moment your beautiful dress will turn back to rags, and the horse and carriage will turn back into the hollow pumpkin and the rat. Your handsome horseman will be plain old Buttons in his scruffy servant attire." "I'll be sure to remember that," said Cinderella. "I shall leave at least 20 minutes before the stroke of midnight in order to give us time to return to Hardup Hall in style." "Goodbye, Cinderella, and good luck," said the fairy godmother, who mysteriously and slowly vanished into thin air. As Buttons guided the horse and carriage towards the palace, people in the street stopped to stare at the magnificent sight. "What a fantastic adventure," said Cinderella. "I shall go to the ball." "I know, it's wonderful," said Buttons. "You look so beautiful and elegant. Once you are there, you will be the belle of the ball." Meanwhile, at the ball, Prince Charming wandered around, introducing himself to the ladies of the kingdom. Although polite and courteous to all of them, he looked visibly antagonized by the two hags who were following him around. Predictably, it was Griselda and Imelda vying and competing for the prince's attention. "Oh, your highness," said Griselda, "I've heard so much about your balls. I hear they get bigger every year. Is this your biggest ball to date?" "He's not interested in you," said Imelda. "It's quite clear he only has eyes for me."
"Dear ladies," said Prince Charming, "thank you for your attention, but I must ask you to leave me in peace, for I have just seen a lady so elegant and so fine that I am compelled to approach her and invite her to dance with me." He was looking towards the ballroom door, where Cinderella had arrived, looking so beautiful and magnificent that she had already managed to steal the prince's heart.
"Who's that, pray?"
said Griselda, oblivious to the fact that the beautiful lady was her downtrodden stepsister, Cinderella.
"I don't know, and I don't care,"
replied Imelda as the prince approached his new potential love.
"He'll soon tire of her," said Griselda. "She's scrawny and not half as glamorous as I." "Too right," said Imelda. "He will tire of her, but it will be me he comes to for the next dance."
The two ugly sisters watched in envy as Prince Charming and the mystery girl danced and danced throughout the night.
"This is your fault. You scared him off with your ridiculous remarks," said Imelda to Griselda. She retorted by saying, "Nonsense! You put him off by making yourself seem too available and cheap." At this point, the two of them started to fight, ripping each other's clothes to shreds. Their disgraceful behaviour was spotted by the king's footman, who had to separate them and reprimand them for their bad behaviour. The prince and the mystery girl laughed about the unseemly episode as they waltzed across the ballroom, staring lovingly into each other's eyes. "I'm having such a wonderful time," said Cinderella. "So am I," said Prince Charming, who added, "Whatever happens between us, I will savour this moment for the rest of my life." "Oh, look at them," said Griselda. "They don't look right together." "You're right," said Imelda. "There's something about her that doesn't ring true." By now, Hyacinth, who had been monitoring the ugly sisters' activities, joined her daughters. "Try and split them apart," said Hyacinth. "That girl is an imposter." The irony was that the only imposter there was Hyacinth, who had gained entrance to the ball by passing herself off as Cinderella. Before either of the ugly sisters had the opportunity of breaking the bond between the love-struck prince and the mystery girl, the clock started to strike midnight. "Oh, no!" Cinderella panicked. "I'm so sorry, Prince Charming, but I have to go." And then in haste, she ran away. "Where are you going?" shouted the prince. But in fear of her identity being revealed, Cinderella swiftly left the palace. On the way down the steps, Cinderella tripped and lost one of her crystal slippers. Noticing she was once again wearing rags, Cinderella ran on past the palace guards so fast they could not see her face. She saw Buttons waiting next to the hollow pumpkin and the rat. "Come," said Buttons, who was also back in his old clothes. "Let's get back to Hardup Hall before we get caught out."
Yes, of course.
As they ran home, Cinderella told Buttons what had happened between her and the prince. They concluded that it was better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. The next morning, it was business as usual at Hardup Hall. The ugly sisters and their mother forced Cinderella to make breakfast and tidy the house.
Make sure the eggs are very well done.
Finally, they ordered her to clean the chimneys, which always ensured she would look sooty and downtrodden.
"Look at her, the scruffy little urchin," said Griselda. "I know, I'm ashamed to be associated with her," said Imelda. "Can you imagine if she had been allowed to attend the ball last night? She would put us all to shame.
Now, said Baron Hardup, don't be too hard on Cinderella. She knows her place and works so hard.
Stop picking on my wonderful daughters, said Hyacinth. You should have seen them last night at the ball. The prince was all over them like a rash.
Said Baron Hardup doubtfully. I'm sure he was.
And as usual disappeared behind his papers. Unexpectedly there was a loud knock on the door, followed by trumpets playing a regal fanfare. Buttons rushed to answer the door and was surprised to be greeted by a royal messenger, surrounded by guards and trumpeters. "Greetings," said the messenger, who stood at the steps of Hardup Hall, holding the crystal glass slipper Cinderella had lost whilst fleeing from the ball. Cinderella, Baron Hardup, the ugly sisters, and Hyacinth gathered around Buttons at the door.
"What brings you to my humble abode?" inquired the Baron.
"Less of the humble," said Hyacinth. "You are a baron, after all. Why are you holding that glass slipper?"
asked Griselda.
"Why, indeed?" asked Imelda. "There is something very strange going on here," she added, before being interrupted by the irritated messenger.
"If you would let me get a word in edgeways, I will explain, dear lady. Last night, Prince Charming met the love of his life. Unfortunately, she unexpectedly fled from the ball as the clock struck midnight. On leaving, she lost this glass slipper on the palace steps."
"Oh, she's very clumsy then, isn't she?" said Griselda. "Quite right," said Imelda. "But it's very good that the palace's lost property department is so efficient. I presume the prince no longer loves the fool who lost the slipper, but is attempting to return it to her by way of compensation."
"You are wrong," said the messenger. "He intends to marry the lady whose foot fits the slipper."
"Oh," said Griselda. "It's just coming back to me. The slipper is mine. It was I who danced with the prince for the entire duration of the ball."
She grabbed the slipper and tried to force her swollen, hairy foot into it. But inevitably and predictably, Griselda failed to impress upon the messenger that the slipper had anything to do with her.
"The slipper is mine!" cried Imelda. "It was I who danced with Prince Charming. I didn't mention it at first, for I was embarrassed about losing the slipper." She snatched the slipper from Griselda's hand and, like her ugly sister, tried to force her hairy, bunion-ridden foot into it. She sweated profusely and tried every way to get the slipper to fit her. "Enough is enough. You are not Prince Charming's love," said the messenger, confiscating the slipper from Imelda, who was devastated. She cried and wept into her mother's arms. "Oh, Mother! I've been deprived of being Prince Charming's love. What am I to do? I am a broken woman."
"Well, you had your chance," said Baron Hardup. "Now step aside and let Cinderella try on the slipper."
"Cinderella?" said Hyacinth. "Don't be ridiculous. She wasn't even at the ball."
"Well, you never know. The slipper might just fit her anyway," whispered the Baron to his seething wife.
Ridiculous, ridiculous.
The messenger handed Cinderella the slipper and said, "Please try it on. It is my duty to ensure every maiden in the land has this opportunity," he added. "I have been to every home in the land, but failed to find any fair maiden whose foot is the exact fit for this wonderful slipper."
The ugly sisters, Hyacinth and Baron Hardup, gasped with disbelief when it became apparent that the slipper fitted Cinderella's dainty foot perfectly. Buttons simply smiled and winked towards the delighted Cinderella.
"Outrageous!" screamed Griselda. "Disgraceful!" cried Imelda. "It's a miscarriage of justice! The slipper is mine! My toenails had grown overnight. That's the only reason the slipper didn't fit."
"Griselda and Imelda, you are a disgrace," said Baron Hardup. "You should be pleased for your stepsister." "Yes, you should," said the messenger. "And I am pleased too, for my work is done. I have found the prince's love, and he will be more than pleased with me for finding him the girl of his dreams." Cinderella was taken to meet the prince at the palace. The spark of love was rekindled. They spent their time together, falling more and more in love as the day went on. "I love you so much," said Prince Charming, who produced a ruby ring which he handed to Cinderella whilst going down on one knee. "Will you marry me and be my wife?" asked the prince. "Of course," said Cinderella. The loving couple were married in the palace the very next day and held their reception in the ballroom. "This is where we first met," said Cinderella. "It means so much to me that our wedding reception is here." "I agree," said Prince Charming. "The first time I saw you here in this very room, I knew I was to spend the rest of my life with you." As Baron Hardup hobnobbed with his new friends, King Horatio and his wife, Queen Henrietta, the ugly sisters and their mother tried to put on a brave face.
"Well, at least we're closer to royalty than we were before," said Griselda. "I suppose you're right," said Imelda. "We'll just have to get used to the fact that we are second fiddle to Cinderella."
Hyacinth agreed.
"Now we're in with the royal family, perhaps you two could find a couple of nice knights or even lords. Oh, the sky is the limit."
They all lived happily ever after at the palace. Griselda was soon to marry one of the king's guards, and did, eventually, become a little more down to earth. Imelda settled down and married a humble servant of the realm. At Cinderella's request, Buttons was given the job of royal butler. It was whilst carrying out his royal duties he met the royal housekeeper, with whom he fell very much in love. As for Baron Hardup, his relationship with Hyacinth greatly improved.
"I'm so pleased that the girls are getting on much better," he said, "and I love our life here at the palace."
"I couldn't agree with you more, my darling man," said Hyacinth, as she lay lovingly in her husband's arms. Years later, when the king died, Prince Charming was the natural heir to the throne. On the day he was crowned king and Cinderella queen, they were taken by horse and carriage on a grand procession through the streets of the kingdom. They stopped in one street to wave at the enthusiastic crowd. Cinderella spotted a little old lady waving towards her with a mysterious glint in her eye. "Surely it can't be, but it is. Oh, it's the old woman who turned into my fairy godmother." Without Prince Charming being aware of the old lady's significance, Cinderella called out to her, Thank you so much for changing my life." Then suddenly, right before the happy couple's eyes, the little old lady smiled and then disappeared into thin air.
Cinderella met a lovely fella, Prince Charming, at the ball.
sisters with their warts and blisters used to make her scrub and crawl. I'll tell her tale for one and all.
As Beauty tucked into the fabulous banquet, the Beast appeared, and he shook her hand.